I watched my father scrubbing oil stains off a driveway on his hands and knees in 90-degree heat, while my brother's wife stood over him with an iced latte, shouting that her friends were arriving in an hour and the driveway better be spotless. The driveway of the house I bought, the house I'd paid for with every cent I'd saved working double shifts at the pharmacy for 3 years. My name is Aisha, and I'm a pharmacist in Detroit. 2 years ago, I did something I dreamed about since I was a kid, working my first part-time job at 16. I bought my parents a home. Not just any home, a beautiful colonial in Dearborn with 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and enough land for my father to finally plant the vegetable garden he'd always talked about. He'd worked in factories for 30 years, and my mother had cleaned houses until her knees gave out. This was supposed to be their reward, their peace. I hadn't visited in 6 months. Work had been brutal, and I'd been saving for the property taxes, making sure everything stayed current. My brother Bilal had moved in to help them, or so I thought. He'd gotten married to Soraya a few months before I bought the house, and I figured having family around would be good for our aging parents. But as I sat in my car in that driveway, watching my mother emerge from the side door carrying a basket of wet laundry that clearly wasn't hers, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Not in buying the house, in trusting my brother to protect what I'd given. This is going to be a difficult story to tell, and I'll need you with me to get through it. To make sure you hear how it all unfolds, you might want to follow along with the other stories here. That way, you won't miss what happens next. I need to take you back to understand how I got here. How a daughter who just wanted to honor her parents ended up sitting in a car, watching them be treated like servants in their own home. I grew up in a small apartment in Detroit. 3 bedrooms for 5 people. Me, my parents, my 2 brothers. Bilal was the oldest, then me, then our youngest brother who passed away in a car accident when I was 17. That loss changed everything. My parents aged overnight. My father's hair went completely gray within a year, and my mother stopped laughing the way she used to. I threw myself into school. If I couldn't bring back the son they'd lost, I could at least make them proud. I got scholarships, worked 2 jobs through pharmacy school, graduated with honors. My parents came to my graduation in their best clothes. My father in a suit he'd bought at a thrift store, my mother in a modest dress she'd sewn herself. They cried when I walked across that stage. Those were tears I wanted to earn again and again. Bilal had a different path. He dropped out of community college, worked construction, then got hired at an auto parts warehouse. He was good with his hands, decent with numbers, but he never had my drive. That was fine. We were different people. What mattered was that we both loved our parents and wanted better for them. When I landed my job at the pharmacy, the pay was better than I'd ever imagined. I lived like a student for 3 more years. Same studio apartment, same beat-up Honda, same rotation of 5 work outfits. Every spare dollar went into a savings account I'd labeled Jana, paradise, because that's what I wanted to build for my parents. Their own little paradise on earth. The house hunt took 4 months. I dragged my father along, pretending I was just dreaming, just looking. He'd point out things he liked. A big kitchen, good light, a yard for tomatoes. I took notes on everything. When I finally found it, I knew immediately. The Colonial in Dearborn had everything. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, safe. There was a mosque 3 blocks away. The backyard was huge and got full sun. I closed on the house without telling them. Then I showed up at their apartment with the keys and the deed with both their names on it. My mother collapsed into a chair and sobbed. My father kissed my forehead and quoted a verse about dutiful children. Bilal clapped me on the back and said he was proud of me. It was the happiest day of my life. They moved in a month later. I helped them pack up that cramped apartment we'd lived in for over 2 decades. Every box I taped up felt like I was sealing away their struggles, their sacrifices. I hung up the last curtain in their new bedroom and drove home feeling like I'd finally done something that mattered, something that would last. 3 months after that, Bilal called and asked if he and his new wife could move in temporarily. He explained that Soraya's lease was ending, they were saving for their own place, and it would mean so much to our parents to have family around. He promised it would just be for 6 months, maybe a year at most. I should have said no. I should have felt the cold warning in my gut. But I thought about my parents getting older, thought about them having help around the house, thought about Bilal finally stepping up to be the son they needed. So I said yes. That was my first mistake. My second was not visiting for 6 months. I trusted my brother. I trusted that he understood what that house meant, what it represented. I was so wrong. It would have been funny if it wasn't destroying the two people I loved most in this world. I didn't get out of the car right away that day. I sat there, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I was seeing. My father was still on his knees. My mother was hanging up clothes that clearly cost more than her entire wardrobe. And Soraya was standing there like she owned the place, checking her phone, completely unbothered by two elderly people working themselves to exhaustion in the heat. Then Soraya's mother, Rana, came out. I'd met her once at the wedding, a loud woman who'd spent the entire reception talking about how her daughter had landed a man with a house and prospects. I thought it was just typical mother of the bride bragging. Now I understood. She thought Bilal owned this house. She thought her daughter had married into property. Rana walked over to my father and I watched her mouth moving, watched him flinch and scrub harder at a stain that was probably older than me. She was treating him like hired help. Worse than hired help. At least employees get paid and can quit. That's when I got out of the car. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly, adjusted my hijab, and walked up the driveway in my work clothes. Simple, professional, modest. Soraya spotted me first. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something close to panic. She called out some excuse about not expecting me, about how it was so good to see me, about how they'd just been doing some yard work. Her voice had that high, fake cheerfulness people use when they're caught doing something they shouldn't. I didn't respond. I walked past her like she was invisible and went straight to my parents. My father tried to stand up too quickly. His knee buckled and I caught his arm. His hands were rough and cracked, and there was a cut on his thumb that looked infected. My mother rushed over, already making excuses, telling me not to worry, that they were just helping out, that they liked staying busy. But their eyes told a different story. They looked scared. Not scared of me, scared for me. Like they were worried about what I might do if I knew the truth. I told them to go inside and wash up, that we'd talk later. Then I turned to Soraya and Rana. I asked them, very calmly, where my brother was. Soraya stumbled through an explanation about him working a double shift, about how hard he was working to provide for the family, about how they were all just pitching in to keep the house nice. I walked inside without asking permission. The house didn't look like the home I'd set up for my parents. The furniture I'd carefully chosen, modest, comfortable, durable, had been replaced with flashy pieces that screamed new money. There were designer shopping bags on the couch, expensive electronics in the living room. The family photos I'd hung had been taken down and replaced with large prints of Soraya and Rana posing in front of what looked like European landmarks. The kitchen was worse. My mother's simple, organized space had become Soraya's Instagram backdrop. There were copper pots hanging from hooks that had never been used for cooking. The good dishes my mother had received as wedding gifts 40 years ago were shoved in a corner, replaced by a set of trendy ceramics that probably cost more than a month of my father's old factory wages. I asked to see my parents' bedroom. Soraya hesitated, then tried to redirect me to the guest room. I didn't ask again. I just walked upstairs to the master suite. Soraya's clothes were everywhere. On the bed, draped over chairs, spilling out of the walk-in closet. Her makeup covered the bathroom counter. Rana had clearly taken over the second bedroom, which I'd imagined as my mother's sewing room. I asked Soraya, still in that calm voice, where exactly my parents were sleeping. She got defensive then, talking about how the elderly prefer smaller spaces, how they'd insisted on the basement apartment because it was cooler in summer. She actually used the word apartment like she'd done them a favor. I went down to the basement. It was unfinished, concrete floors, exposed pipes, a dehumidifier running constantly. In one corner was a thin mattress on a cheap metal frame, covered with the old blankets from their apartment. My mother's prayer rug was folded neatly beside it. My father's reading glasses sat on an upturned crate he was using as a nightstand. This was where the owners of the house were sleeping, while strangers took over the rooms I'd bought for them. This was what my trust in my brother had bought. I came back upstairs and found Soraya on the phone with someone, speaking fast in a panicked voice. When she saw me, she hung up quickly and tried that fake smile again. She suggested we all have tea and talk like adults, like family. She said I seemed stressed and probably just needed to understand the arrangement better. I told her I understood perfectly. Then I took out my phone and started taking pictures of everything: the replaced furniture, the designer bags, the photos on the walls. Soraya demanded to know what I was doing. Rana came out of her room asking what all the noise was about. I smiled at them for the first time since I'd arrived. I told them I'd be back tomorrow and that they should probably make sure Bilal was here. Then I went back outside to where my parents were sitting on the porch. Their porch, looking terrified of what might happen next. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to make trouble. She said Bilal was trying his best, that Soraya was young and would learn, that they didn't mind helping out. My father said nothing, but I saw the shame in his eyes, the humiliation of what I'd seen, of what I now knew. I kissed both their foreheads and promised them that everything was going to be okay, that I would fix this. I drove back to Detroit that night with my hands shaking on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might have to pull over. I'd spent 3 years building them a paradise. Someone had turned it into their personal hell, and I was going to burn it all down to get it back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, making lists. I'm a pharmacist. I know how to be methodical, how to follow protocols, how to measure exact doses. This situation needed the same approach. Emotion would make me sloppy. Strategy would make me effective. First, I needed to understand exactly what was happening. Not just what I'd seen, but the full scope. So I called my parents' neighbors, people I'd met during the home buying process, a retired couple named the Hendersons who lived 2 houses down. I introduced myself as the daughter, said I was checking in because I couldn't reach my parents easily, asked if everything seemed okay at the house. The silence that followed told me everything before Mrs. Henderson even spoke. Then it all came out. She'd seen my parents doing yard work in the heat while Soraya and Rana entertained friends. She'd watched them taking out trash late at night. She'd heard Soraya yelling at them about how they did things wrong. The Hendersons had actually tried to intervene once, asked my father if he needed help, and he just smiled and said they were happy to help their son's family. Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked when she told me she'd suspected something was wrong, but didn't know who to call. I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to keep notes of what she observed going forward. She said she'd been keeping a journal for 3 months already, just in case someone ever asked. Next, I called the utility companies. The house was in my parents' names, but I'd set up the accounts. I had access to everything. The water bill had tripled. The electricity was running at levels consistent with multiple people using high-end electronics and appliances constantly. My parents, who'd spent their whole lives conserving every dollar, were now footing the bill for Soraya's lifestyle. Then I did something that felt invasive, but necessary. I activated the security cameras I'd installed when I bought the house. I'd set them up for my parents' safety. Cameras at the front door, back door, and garage. I'd never checked them because I'd trusted everything was fine. I logged into the app and started scrolling through saved footage. What I found made me physically ill. Weeks of recordings showing my parents working, cleaning, cooking, carrying things, being ordered around. There was footage of Rana pointing at things for my mother to clean. Footage of Soraya throwing a dish towel at my father when he didn't wash something fast enough. Footage of my mother sitting alone in the dark on the back steps at 11 p.m., her shoulders shaking like she was crying. I watched my father carry groceries in while Bilal walked past him empty-handed talking on his phone. I watched my mother serve dinner to Soraya and her friends while they ignored her like she was invisible. I watched Rana go through my parents' belongings in the basement like she was shopping at a yard sale. The most damning footage was from 2 weeks ago. Soraya was on the phone with someone, probably a friend, giving a house tour. She walked through every room talking about her house, her furniture, her beautiful life. She mentioned the hardworking help she had living in the basement, elderly relatives who were so grateful to have a place to stay. I downloaded everything, organized it by date and severity, created a folder with the worst clips highlighted. Then I called Bilal, not to confront him. Not yet. I told him I was coming back the next day and wanted to take everyone out to dinner, my treat, to celebrate the house and catch up properly. He sounded relieved, even happy. He said Soraya had told him about my surprise visit, that there'd been some misunderstanding, that he was glad I wanted to talk like family. I confirmed the time and said I'd make a reservation somewhere nice. He said he'd make sure everyone was ready. The performance in his voice, the fake warmth, the desperate attempt to sound normal, told me he knew exactly what was happening in that house. He wasn't ignorant, he was complicit. The next day, I called in sick to work. I drove back to Dearborn in the morning, but I didn't go to the house. I went to a law office downtown. I'd done my research the night before, found a firm that specialized in elder law and property rights. I sat across from an attorney named Rebecca Martinez and laid out everything. The deed, the utility bills, the neighbor's testimony, the video evidence. She watched 3 minutes of footage and closed her laptop. She told me I had an open and shut case for elder abuse, property fraud, and exploitation. She said I could have them removed immediately, could press charges if I wanted, could sue for damages. She also said that family cases like this get ugly fast, that I should be prepared for my brother to choose his wife over his parents, over me. I asked what the fastest legal path was. She said I didn't need a legal path at all. I owned the house outright. I could evict them with 30 days' notice. No reason required. But if I wanted them gone immediately, I needed to prove they were a danger to my parents. With my footage, that would take one phone call to Adult Protective Services. I told her I wanted to try something else first, something that would make them leave on their own. She raised an eyebrow and asked what I had in mind. I explained my plan. She was quiet for a moment, then smiled and said she'd be on standby if I needed her. I left her office feeling clear-headed for the first time in 36 hours. I stopped at a business supply store and bought a small projector. Then I went to the house, arriving exactly when I said I would. Bilal was there, freshly showered, trying too hard to seem casual. Soraya had dressed up like we were going to a 5-star restaurant. Rana was wearing enough jewelry to stock a small store. My parents were in the clothes I'd seen them working in the day before, looking anxious and small. I told them all to relax, that I'd ordered catering instead of going out, that we'd have a nice family dinner at home. Soraya actually looked relieved. She probably thought she'd dodged whatever confrontation she'd been worried about. I helped my mother set the table with the good dishes. I made tea. I asked Soraya about her friends, her life, her plans. I was perfectly pleasant. The tension slowly drained from the room. Bilal started telling stories about work. Rana started bragging about Soraya's social circle. They thought I'd been won over. They thought I'd accepted this new arrangement. That's what I wanted them to think. Because the dinner wasn't the plan. The dinner was just getting them comfortable, getting them to let their guard down. The real plan was coming later that evening, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. The catered dinner went exactly as I'd orchestrated. Buttered chicken, biryani, samosas, all of Soraya's favorites, which I'd learned from her social media posts. I'd spent the afternoon scrolling through her Instagram while sitting in a coffee shop, learning everything I could about her. She posted constantly. Her whole life was performance. What I found was enlightening. Photos of her house, photos of her designer purchases, photos of her friends visiting her beautiful home. In every caption, she positioned herself as someone who'd made it, someone who'd married well, someone living the American dream. There was even a post from a month ago showing my mother's hands kneading dough captioned, "So grateful for the help, couldn't do it without my support system." With laughing emojis, my mother had become content for her social media brand. During dinner, I played my role perfectly. I asked Soraya where she got certain decorations, complimented Rana's jewelry, told Bilal how proud I was that he was working so hard. I watched them relax degree by degree, watched the defensiveness melt away. Soraya even started giving me advice about my modest lifestyle, suggesting I treat myself more, live a little. I smiled and nodded and let her talk. After dinner, I suggested coffee in the living room. Soraya lit candles. Rana settled into the best chair like a queen on her throne. Bilal looked genuinely happy, probably relieved that his two worlds weren't colliding the way he'd feared. My parents sat quietly on the smaller couch, the one pushed against the wall. They'd barely eaten. They knew me too well. They could sense I was up to something. I stood up and said I'd brought something to show them. A little presentation about family and gratitude. Soraya perked up, probably thinking I was about to show appreciation for how well they were taking care of my parents. I pulled out the projector and my laptop. Bilal looked confused. Soraya looked excited. Rana was already reaching for her phone to document the moment. I queued up the first video and pressed play. The security footage filled the wall behind me. My mother carrying laundry, Soraya yelling at her about fabric softener. No sound needed. The body language said everything. The date stamp on the video showed it was from 2 weeks ago, 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. Soraya's smile vanished. Bilal sat forward. Rana stopped mid-sip of her coffee. I let it play for 30 seconds, then switched to the next one. My father on his knees scrubbing the garage floor while Rana stood over him pointing. Then another. And another. I had dozens queued up. I showed them 2 minutes of footage, a highlight reel of abuse, exploitation, and casual cruelty. The room was silent except for the audio from the videos. When Soraya's voice came through a clip yelling about how the house better be spotless before her guests arrived, I saw Bilal's face change. Whatever story Soraya had told him, whatever version of reality she'd constructed, it was crumbling. I stopped the video and turned on the lights. Soraya started talking immediately, her voice shrill and defensive. She claimed it was all out of context, that my parents insisted on helping, that I was making it look worse than it was. Rana backed her up, talking over her, saying I was being dramatic and disrespectful. I let them finish. Then I pulled out a folder. Inside were printed screenshots of Soraya's Instagram posts, every photo showing off her house, every caption claiming her success, every lie she'd constructed. I laid them out on the coffee table one by one like I was dealing cards. I asked Soraya very calmly when she'd planned to tell her friends that she didn't own this house, that she was living here rent-free while treating the actual owners like servants. She tried to laugh it off, said everyone exaggerates on social media, that it didn't mean anything. Rana jumped in, suddenly aggressive, asking who I thought I was coming into their home and making accusations. Bilal told his mother-in-law to be quiet, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. I pulled out the next document, the property deed. I placed it in the center of the table where everyone could see it. I pointed to the ownership line showing both my parents' names. Then I showed them the transfer document showing I'd purchased it. Then I showed them my bank statements proving I'd paid for everything. The room went very still. Soraya's face had gone pale. Rana was staring at the papers like they might change if she looked hard enough. Bilal had his head in his hands. I told them I had a proposal. They could stay, but there would be conditions. First, they'd pay rent going forward, market rate for the area, which I'd researched was $3,500 a month. Second, they'd reimburse my parents for 6 months of unpaid labor at Michigan's minimum wage for a live-in caretaker, which came to roughly $12,000. Third, they'd move out of the master suite immediately and treat my parents with the respect due to homeowners and elders. Or they could leave. 30 days as the law required. Soraya erupted. She accused me of trying to destroy her marriage, of being jealous of her happiness, of never accepting her into the family. She turned to Bilal demanding he stand up for her, asking him if he was really going to let his sister treat his wife this way. Bilal looked at his wife, then at our parents sitting silently on the couch, then at me. I saw him calculating, weighing his options, trying to find a way to keep everyone happy. I didn't give him time to find a compromise. I told him I'd be back in 1 week for his answer. Until then, I was moving my parents out of the basement and into a hotel. They would not spend one more night sleeping on a thin mattress in an unfinished basement of the house I bought for them. Rana stood up, her face red, telling me I had no right to break up this family, that I was being cruel and ungrateful. Soraya was crying now, ugly tears that smeared her makeup. I ignored them both. I went to the basement, helped my parents pack a small bag, and walked them out to my car. Bilal followed us out, trying to talk, trying to explain, but I told him I'd given him my terms and he had 7 days to decide. As we drove away, my mother was quiet. My father stared out the window. I'd checked us into a hotel near my apartment in Detroit. Nothing fancy, but clean and comfortable with a big bed and a working television and no one ordering them around. That night, I lay in my hotel bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd just destroyed my family to save it. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from Bilal begging me to talk, voicemails from Soraya alternating between apologies and accusations, even a message from Rana threatening legal action. I turned my phone off and tried to sleep. But my mind kept spinning, kept planning, kept preparing for what came next. Because I knew Bilal wouldn't meet my terms. I knew Soraya wouldn't leave quietly. I knew this was about to get much worse before it got better. What I didn't know was that Soraya was already planning something of her own. My parents stayed at the hotel for 4 days. On the 5th day, my mother told me they wanted to go back. Not to the house, to their old apartment building. She'd called their former landlord, asked if any units were available. She said they'd be happier in a small space they knew than in a house that had become a battlefield. That conversation broke something in me. I'd worked for years to get them out of that cramped apartment. I'd sacrificed everything to give them comfort and dignity. And now they wanted to go back because I'd tried to protect them. I told my mother we weren't giving up. The house was theirs. I'd make sure of it. She just looked at me with tired eyes and said some battles weren't worth the cost. But I'd already crossed too many lines to stop. I'd already seen too much, and I was starting to realize this wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about every time someone took advantage of people too kind to fight back. Every time someone exploited generosity and called it family. Every time a son chose his wife's comfort over his parents' dignity. On day 6, Bilal finally called. Not texted, called. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. He said he needed to meet me somewhere private, just the two of us. I suggested a diner halfway between Detroit and Dearborn. Neutral ground. He showed up looking worse than he sounded. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt wrinkled. He ordered coffee and didn't touch it. For 5 minutes, we sat in silence while I waited for him to speak. Finally, he said he'd tried. He'd told Soraya my terms were fair, that we needed to make this right. She'd refused. She'd called me every name she could think of, said I was destroying their marriage, that if he sided with me, she'd leave him. Rana had backed her up, threatened to turn the whole community against our family if we humiliated them. Bilal told me he understood what I was trying to do, but he was asking me to consider his position. He loved his wife. He'd made vows. He couldn't just throw her out. I asked him if he'd made vows to our parents, too. If the years they'd sacrificed for him meant nothing. If watching our father scrub driveways and our mother sleep in a basement was acceptable as long as his marriage stayed intact. He flinched but didn't answer. Instead, he made a counteroffer. What if Soraya apologized? What if they started paying some rent, maybe $1,000 a month to start, and increased it over time? What if they made some changes, treated our parents better? I laughed. Actually laughed, right there in the diner. I asked him if he seriously thought I'd negotiate with someone who'd spent 6 months abusing my parents. If he really believed a $1,000 payment and an apology would fix this. He got defensive then. Said I didn't understand marriage, that compromise was part of love, that I was being unreasonable. He accused me of enjoying this, of wanting to punish Soraya instead of actually helping our parents. That's when something clicked. I pulled out my phone and showed him more footage I hadn't revealed at dinner. This one was from a month ago. Soraya on the phone with a friend, laughing about the live-in help she'd acquired, describing my mother as simple and eager to please, calling my father the old man who did whatever they told him as long as they let him stay. I watched my brother's face as he listened to his wife mock our parents, watched something in him break and harden simultaneously. He asked me to stop the video, said he got the point. Then he asked me what I really wanted. If I wanted them gone, wanted Soraya destroyed, wanted him to divorce her. I told him the truth. I wanted my parents safe and respected. Everything else was his choice, but I wouldn't watch them be abused anymore. Not by his wife, not by anyone. If he couldn't protect them, I would. And my methods wouldn't be gentle. We sat in that diner for another hour. He tried different angles. Family unity, cultural expectations. What would people think? I countered every argument with simple facts. The house wasn't his. The choice wasn't mine. His parents deserved basic human decency. Finally, he asked me for more time. 2 weeks. He'd work on Soraya, try to make her see reason. He promised things would change. I told him he had until the end of the week. Then I was taking legal action. I'd already consulted a lawyer. I had evidence. I would win. He left the diner defeated. I left it certain of what I had to do next. Because while I'd been having coffee with my brother, Mrs. Henderson had called me. She'd seen something that morning. Soraya and Rana loading suitcases into a car. Not small bags. The expensive luggage set Soraya had posted about on Instagram. They'd driven away and come back hours later empty-handed. They were hiding assets, clearing out anything valuable before I could claim it as reimbursement. They knew I was coming for them, and they were preparing for war. I spent that evening documenting everything in the house through my security footage. Every item they'd bought with my parents' utility money, every piece of furniture they'd replaced, every expensive purchase. I created a spreadsheet with estimated values, photographed receipts they'd left lying around, cross-referenced it with credit card statements my father had unknowingly given me access to. The total was staggering. In 6 months, they'd spent over $40,000 on furniture, clothes, electronics, trips, and Soraya's social life. Money that should have been going to my parents' comfort and security. I sent the documentation to Rebecca Martinez. She called me within an hour and said I had enough to file for full restitution. We could freeze their accounts, put liens on any property they owned, make their lives financially miserable. But that felt too clean, too distant, too legal. I wanted them to feel what they'd done, wanted them to face my parents and their community and answer for their choices. Wanted everyone who'd admired Soraya's Instagram life to see the truth underneath. So I made a plan. Soraya loved showing off, loved performing her perfect life for an audience. She had a birthday party coming up. I'd seen the event planning posts, the excited comments, the guest list that included half of Dearborn's young professional community. She was throwing her party at her house, and I was going to attend. Rebecca asked me if I was sure I wanted to handle it this way. Public confrontation could go wrong in a dozen ways. It was messier than courtrooms, less predictable than legal proceedings. I told her I was certain, because Soraya had made my parents' suffering public, posted it online, displayed it to her friends, made entertainment of their exploitation. She'd turned their dignity into her social currency. It was time someone returned the favor. Soraya's birthday party was on a Saturday evening. I knew the date because she'd created a whole Instagram countdown, posting teasers about her epic celebration. The theme was Mediterranean elegance. She'd hired caterers, a bartender, even a photographer to document the event. According to her posts, over 50 people were coming. She'd turned my parents' home into her personal venue without asking permission from the people whose names were on the deed. I didn't tell Bilal I was coming. I didn't tell my parents. I just showed up at 7 p.m. in my best abaya, dark emerald green, elegant, commanding. I'd spent an hour on my appearance, not out of vanity, but strategy. I wanted to look like someone who belonged, someone with authority, someone who couldn't be dismissed or ignored. The house was transformed. Lights strung up in the yard, expensive cars lining the street, music drifting through open windows. Soraya had posted the address publicly on her invitation, which had been my entry point. I walked up the driveway I'd paid for, past decorations I'd never approved, toward a party happening in a house that was never hers to use. A young man at the door stopped me, asking if I was on the guest list. I told him I was the homeowner and smiled when his face went confused. Before he could respond, I walked past him into the living room. The party was in full swing. People everywhere, drinks flowing, Soraya holding court in the center, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The furniture had been moved around. Photos of my parents removed entirely. She'd literally erased them from their own home. I spotted Rana first, playing hostess, directing staff she'd hired with God knows what money. Then I saw Bilal in a corner, looking uncomfortable in an expensive suit, talking to people he clearly didn't know. I didn't see my parents anywhere. Of course not. They'd probably been told to stay in the basement while Soraya showcased her fake life. I walked through the crowd calmly, making my way toward the center of the room. A few people looked at me curiously. My traditional dress stood out among the cocktail attire and designer brands. When Soraya finally spotted me, her face went sheet white. She recovered quickly, putting on that fake smile, approaching me with arms outstretched like we were close friends. She said something about being so happy I could make it, how she'd meant to invite me personally, but things had been so busy. I didn't smile back. I didn't play along. I simply asked her, loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause, whose home she was celebrating in. She laughed nervously and said it was her house, her party, her birthday. Rana appeared at her shoulder, already defensive, asking what I was doing there. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the entertainment system Soraya had set up. She'd left it open, probably to play her birthday slideshow later. The TV mounted on the wall lit up. People started noticing, turning to see what was happening. I didn't start with the abuse videos. I started with Soraya's own Instagram posts, every photo claiming ownership of her house, every caption talking about her success, every lie she'd told her followers projected in high definition for her party guests to see. Then I showed the deed, zoomed in on my parents' names. explained in a clear, calm voice that carried across the now silent room that this house belonged to Yusuf and Fatima Malik, that I had purchased it for them 2 years ago as a gift, that Soraya and my brother were guests who had overstayed their welcome. Soraya tried to talk over me, her voice getting shriller, insisting it was family business, that I was being inappropriate, that this was her birthday. Guests started murmuring, phones coming out. Some people were recording. Others looked deeply uncomfortable and started edging toward the door. I switched to the security footage. Just 30 seconds. My father on his knees cleaning, my mother carrying heavy laundry, Soraya pointing and directing them like staff. No commentary needed. The images spoke for themselves. The room erupted. Some of Soraya's friends started asking questions. Others defended her, saying I was jealous or crazy. Bilal finally moved, pushing through the crowd toward me, begging me to stop, saying we could talk privately, but I wasn't done. I displayed the financial records, showed how much they'd spent in 6 months, listed the items they'd removed from the house, presented the amount they owed in unpaid rent and stolen utilities. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called my parents from the basement. My father appeared first, confused, scared. Then my mother. They stood in the doorway of their own living room like strangers at someone else's party. The contrast was stark. Elderly couple in simple clothes watching their home being used as a stage for someone else's celebration. I asked Soraya directly, in front of everyone, did these people look like staff to her? Did they look like charity cases grateful for her generosity? Rana started screaming then, calling me every name she could think of, saying I was destroying their family, ruining her daughter's special day. Soraya was crying, mascara running, her perfect party collapsed around her. But several guests weren't leaving. They were listening, recording. Some of Soraya's closest friends approached my parents, apologizing, saying they hadn't known. One woman I recognized from Instagram posts actually handed my mother her business card, said she ran a community organization that helped elderly victims of financial abuse. Bilal finally found his voice. He looked at Soraya, at his parents, at me. He told Soraya and Rana to leave. Right now. Tonight. He said they'd destroyed enough. Soraya screamed at him, called him weak, pathetic, controlled by his sister. She said if she left, she wasn't coming back. He could choose his family or choose her, but he couldn't have both. The room held its breath. Bilal looked at our father, who hadn't said a word through any of this. Our father just put his hand on Bilal's shoulder and squeezed. That was enough. Bilal told Soraya to pack a bag. She had 1 hour. Rana protested, threatened legal action, promised to destroy our family's reputation. But guests were already leaving, taking their recordings with them. The performance was over. The truth was out. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty, except for family. Soraya threw things in suitcases, ranting about betrayal and cruelty. Rana called me every curse she knew. Bilal stood in the hallway looking shell-shocked, caught between relief and grief. I helped my mother take down Soraya's decorations, put away the expensive dishes, started returning the house to what it was supposed to be, a home, not a showpiece. When Soraya and Rana finally left, peeling out of the driveway in their loaded car, my mother started crying. Not from relief, from exhaustion, from months of holding in fear and humiliation, from finally being able to breathe in her own home. My father held her while she cried. Bilal stood apart, probably processing that his marriage had just ended in spectacular public fashion. I sat on the porch steps, shaking from adrenaline, wondering if I'd gone too far. Mrs. Henderson appeared from next door. She'd heard everything, had probably watched from her window. She hugged me without saying a word. Then she went inside and hugged my mother. Later, I learned she'd already shared videos from the party that other guests had posted online. Soraya's performance had become infamous, but not in the way she'd intended. The sun was setting when we finally locked the door behind us. My parents went upstairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom, and collapsed on the bed. Bilal sat in the kitchen staring at nothing, and I stood in the living room I'd seen destroyed and reclaimed, wondering what exactly I'd won. That was 8 months ago. The house is quiet now, in a way it never was during Soraya's occupation. It's a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes from people who actually belong there, who can breathe without performing. My parents moved back into the master bedroom that weekend. We threw out everything Soraya had left behind. And she'd left plenty. Clothes she deemed not worth taking, furniture she'd gotten bored with, decorations that had served their Instagram purpose. The local charity pickup crew couldn't believe what we were giving away. Mrs. Henderson helped us repaint. My father planted his vegetable garden, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. My mother set up her sewing machine in the spare bedroom. The house slowly transformed back into what I'd intended. A home, not a museum to someone else's fake success. Bilal lives there still. He moved into the smallest bedroom, pays rent, not the market rate I demanded, but something fair that he insisted on. He works doubles when he can, sends money to Soraya per their divorce settlement, and spends his evenings helping our father in the garden. He doesn't talk much about what happened. The shame runs too deep. But he shows up differently now. He brings groceries without being asked. He fixed the leaky sink and repaired the fence. He sits with our father in the evenings, and sometimes I'll see them talking quietly, working through things I'll never fully understand. As for Soraya and Rana, the aftermath was swift and brutal. The party videos went viral locally. Soraya's Instagram following collapsed as people realized her entire life was performance built on exploitation. She deleted her accounts, but screenshots live forever. Last I heard, she was working retail and living with Rana in a one-bedroom apartment across town. The community response split exactly as I'd expected. Half condemned me for public humiliation, said I'd handled it wrong, that family issues should stay private. The other half thanked me for exposing what they'd suspected, shared their own stories of being taken advantage of by people who weaponized family obligation. I learned something during those months of fallout. There's no clean way to set boundaries after years of violation. Someone always gets hurt. Someone always calls you cruel. The question is whether you can live with protecting yourself and the people you love, even when others don't understand the full story. Rebecca Martinez became more than my lawyer. She introduced me to an immigrant community organization, and I started volunteering. Turns out there are hundreds of stories like my parents'. Elderly people whose generosity gets exploited, whose homes become prisons, whose kindness is mistaken for weakness. I help them navigate property law now. Help them understand they have rights even when family makes them feel powerless. It's become my second calling after pharmacy. Some people think I'm too harsh, that I encourage division, but I've seen too many broken people crying in their own homes to care about being called harsh. My parents are healing. My mother laughs again. My father tends his garden and doesn't flinch when people raise their voices. They have friends now, neighbors who check in, other elderly couples they've met at the mosque. They're building the life I'd envisioned for them, just 3 years later than planned. The biggest surprise has been Bilal. He brought a woman to dinner last month, a kind, quiet person who teaches elementary school and doesn't need his house to prove her worth. They're taking things slow. She asked my parents' permission before they started dating seriously. The contrast to Soraya is so stark, it's almost funny. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently, stayed silent, let the situation resolve itself, trusted Bilal to figure it out on his own. But then I remember my mother sleeping in that basement, my father on his knees. The way they'd given up fighting because family is supposed to mean sacrifice. I learned that sacrifice without boundaries is just abuse with a prettier name. That love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is draw a hard line and refuse to move. The house in Dearborn is worth more now than when I bought it. Property values have increased, but I'll never sell it. It represents something bigger than investment returns or square footage. It represents what happens when you refuse to let people mistake kindness for weakness, when you protect those who taught you everything about love and sacrifice. I still work at the pharmacy in Detroit, still live modestly, still save aggressively because old habits die hard. But I visit Dearborn every weekend now, sit in my parents' kitchen drinking tea, help my father with the garden, listen to my mother's plans for expanding her sewing business. And every time I pull into that driveway, I remember Soraya standing there with her iced latte while my father scrubbed oil stains. I remember feeling powerless and furious and determined. I remember deciding that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight gets ugly, especially when the fight gets ugly. If you've listened to this whole story, thank you for staying with me. It wasn't easy to share, and I imagine it wasn't always easy to hear. But these stories matter. These moments when we choose dignity over peace, truth over comfort, they shape who we become. I'd love to know where you're listening from. What corner of the world brought you to this story? Drop your city in the comments. And if this resonated with you, if you or someone you know has faced something similar, consider subscribing. More stories are coming, and we're building a community of people who believe that family should mean love, not exploitation. May we all have the courage to protect the people who matter most, even when that protection comes with a cost. May we all know our worth and demand it be recognized. And may we all find our way home, to places where we're valued, respected, and genuinely welcome. Thank you for listening. Until next time.